Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of It Is Chaile Time. Okay, so I'm doing a solo today. My colleague Tsepo is not involved today. I am going to teach you how to better negotiate. Now this lesson is really for everyone because it applies to various fields of human life. In your marriage with your spouse, your relationship with your employer, but also dispute resolution at the CCMA. Also collective bargaining, you know, when you're sitting around the table with staff or trade unions and you want to negotiate benefits and so forth. But we're going to focus on conciliation. Why? Because that's what we do. CCMA and bargaining councils, dispute resolution, that's the world that we are living in. Many HR managers or IR practitioners, lawyers, people like myself, will go to conciliation and we ask ourselves this question: how do you get the result you want? Now, do understand this, you don't always get the result you want. That doesn't exist. You can't manipulate people, you can't force them to do anything. But you can influence people. But how do you do that? How do you approach conciliation? And let's say the employee was dismissed for theft as an example. Now you're going to conciliation and the employee wants 12 months compensation, almost how they work, you know. How do you approach it? Some people, they go in there, they're quite aggressive from the employer side, you know. We will not pay you. It's the principle of the matter. You stole. How do you dare still sit here, ask us for money? Other people are more calm and collected, but are there some guiding principles how to negotiate better and maybe stand a better chance of actually influencing people? So I'm going to touch base on a few tips that I use and techniques I use to influence people, hopefully more aligned and in favor of my client's interests, which are mostly that of an employer. So even though today's lesson is for everyone, and literally I mean everyone, if you're in any form of relationship, at some point you're going to negotiate. Whether you're fighting for the pillow with your wife, who's sleeping on what pillow, whether it is that you want a salary increase or whether it's a dispute at the CCMA. The tips I'm going to mention this morning is only like three or four tips. You know, it will really help you to influence people and try to get the result that you want. Now, do understand that this is not the only way of doing negotiation. It's not the only tips out there. I'm sure every single one of you have your story to tell. There's your ways of doing things that may be successful. But how do I do it, okay? About 2 years ago, I read this book. It's called Never Split the Difference, okay? Negotiating as if your life dependent on it. It's written by Chris Voss. You can actually find this book on Takealot. If you are in human resources or are in the legal industry, you're a lawyer or so, you must read this book. It's going to cost you, I think it's about 200 Rand. Get this book. It's really food for thought. And Chris Voss, he was the lead international hostage negotiator for the FBI for 24 years. And he tells story after story after story throughout his career how he negotiated for the release of hostages. Often hostages that had been kidnapped by terrorists, and so on and so forth. He is saying if he negotiates and lose, somebody dies. So yeah, I think that is a bit more aggressive environment than what we normally experience at the CCMA. Nobody died at the CCMA, I hope not, you know. So he illustrates the techniques that he used in the FBI to make him much more successful. So what are some of those tips? So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to give you some of these tips, quickly discuss it, and then I'm going to use 3 examples in my life where I've applied this. Look, I apply it every single time I go to the CCMA, but I'm just going to highlight 3 examples which illustrates the points. So number 1, I think it is important to understand that, let's say in a setup of conciliation at the CCMA. Now, for those who may not necessarily know, In principle, when it comes to dispute resolution, let's talk a dismissal dispute as an example, because that's probably the most common kind of dispute you will get at the CCMA. There are typically two processes. Now, I'm not going to venture too much in the processes, but in essence, you get conciliation. Conciliation is an informal process. It really is, just to test the appetites as to whether people would like to settle a dispute or not. Settling sometimes is much better way than actually going through arbitration, because in arbitration there's a winner and there's a loser. Now, arbitration is with prejudice, conciliation is without prejudice, so as a matter of fact, conciliation is so informal, I suppose you don't even have to pitch. I do recommend that you do a pitch, because you need to try to resolve the matter, and those who know something about the legal dispute resolution system may know that arbitration is, even if you win the case, is not necessarily the end of the matter. There's always the possibility of going to a review in the Labour Court, maybe thereafter appeal at the Labour Appeal Court, and in some instances you can even go up to the Constitutional Court. Cases like this can take many years and become very costly. So conciliation obviously is very important. If you do settle, it sort of draws the case to its finality. But okay, having said that, what are the principles that can help you influence, let's say, the employee in a conciliation situation, if you are representing an employer, and the same principles applies to the employee party. The employer needs or her representative, maybe it's a trade union or an attorney, or even you herself, representing against the company. But okay, let's speak from the position of the employer. We represent mostly employers, and for simplicity's sake, to actually drive the point, I talk as a representative of an employer. So here we go into conciliation. The first thing to understand, there's always this us-them feeling. It's an emotion, okay? Humans think on two levels. There's the emotional level, that's why they say feeling is thinking, and there's also the logical level. I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, but it seems like our biology is of such nature that humans mostly operate out of the emotional level. We feel like doing this, we don't feel like doing that. You feel your employer is unfair. It may not necessarily be illogical, like for instance, a person will be dismissed for theft, but then the employer fire them, but it's unfair emotionally. But yeah, you still but you see, there's often no connection between our emotions and our logic, what we think, okay? So the trick for you as the representative of the company, or myself in this situation, is to try to create that link between emotions and logic. Let the person eventually start thinking logically and start making better decisions. So, and that comes with understanding. First and foremost, there's this us-them feeling when you come into conciliation. And it comes down to who wants to exert authority and power. You need to understand that. So when you go into conciliation, the other party will feel they want power. They want to dominate. They want to rule. They want to get what they want to get. So it's important for you as a negotiator in this case to understand those kind of dynamics. So your first step is, and some people may disagree with me, I have seen very aggressive negotiators that intimidates commissioners. I've seen that, and sometimes it works. It is just not my style. I suppose sometimes you need to do that, and there have been occasions where somebody told me they thought I'm going to beat the other guy with a fist, but that's more the exception than the norm. In principle, it's important for you to calm the audience down. With other words, conciliation is this theater, and you have certain actors in this theater. You and your party, you have the employee, maybe the employee's representatives, and you also have the commissioner. You need to calm them down, because if people are calmed down, they will be open for suggestion, for influence. How do I do it? I will typically go into conciliation. I will go to the other party and greet the other party. Take his hand with the one hand, and with the other hand I will touch slightly on the person's elbow. It creates a sense of unity. It creates a sense of fairness. it creates a sense of, I don't want to use the word intimacy, but in a way, I suppose it is, it breaks down that divide of us versus them. I also greet the commissioner very friendly, and when I greet the others, okay, I typically let the commissioner see it. I do it normally in the space of the commissioner, because psychologically I need to influence him too, that we are not these malicious employers, we're just trying to take advantage, capitalists, It's important to influence your environment. Now, what is the science behind this? In your brain, there's an organ called the medulla oblongata. That organ triggers your fight or flight response. So think about this. If you're in the wild and there's a lion jumping out of the bush coming for you, your medulla oblongata will do one of two things. Run away and climb on the nearest tree, or run towards the lion and beat him with your fist. And emotionally it works the same. If you perceive data through your eyes, your nose, I suppose your mouth, your ears, for all your sensory organs, if you sense a threat, your medulla oblongata will start responding, fighting or flighting. So if you walk into conciliation and you start swearing at the people, or you're aggressive, you didn't shave, psychologically the other people are getting ready for a fight. They're building up their walls, they're going to resist, they're not going to be open for suggestion. But if you greet, touch on the elbow, being friendly, making eye contact, it stimulates the medulla oblongata to not fight. So that's probably laying the foundation and probably the most important part of negotiation. Then there are certain tips. Now, the key with the tips I'm going to mention now is really to create the illusion that the other party is in control, not you. You're going to have to somehow get it right, that the other party feel that the ideas was theirs. That's how you need to try to, that's the point of these tips. Because if you're just going to go in there and, it's me and my interest, and you will do this, you will do that, the medulla oblongata is going to trigger the fight response, they're going to close their walls and going to start fighting back. You're not going to get anywhere. Okay, so what can you do? Now, once again, this is not 100% it's not 100% successful. There's no guarantees, and the reason being is you can't manipulate people, okay? You can't force people, but you can influence people. People are actually very easily influenced, and I've had a measure of success too at CCMAs where you get cases withdrawn because of some of these techniques. But okay, without further ado, what are these techniques? Number one, so we've laid the foundation now. Okay, we're creating the environment where we break down that wall of us versus them, keeping in mind everyone wants the authority, everyone wants to lead, everyone wants to feel they are in control and they have power, and that's your greatest weapon. Create illusion that the other party is in control and have power. So step number one, there's a concept called mirroring. In Afrikaans hulle sê 'n spieël, né? A mirror. Mirror means you let the other party begin. Let them talk. Ask them, what's the dispute about? What are the issues? And let them talk. They may say things like the boss is always picking on me, and I'm always the one getting disciplined, I've been working there for a very long time and they don't respect me, they don't appreciate me. And once they are finished, mirroring means recall what they said. So you must write down the bullet points on a piece of paper. So then you say, okay, Jan, I just want to check if I hear you correctly. You are saying that you feel your boss is unfair. He's always picking on me. You've been working for such a long time, etc., etc. And then he will say yes. Okay, because now you're accurately recording what he's saying. What happens psychologically? You create the impression that, hey, this guy's listening. He actually hears me. For you, it may be a small thing because you also want to dominate and feel power, but you've got to be wise now, okay? And these tricks work, and I'm going to, one of my illustrations later is with me and my wife. So, these tips actually work, So you create the impression that guy is in control, you mirror what he was saying. It creates the impression and the psychological understanding that, hey, here's somebody that actually hears me, okay? The second point then is what we call labeling. You need to try to identify the emotion of that person. So that person say, my boss is always picking on me or whatever. After you've recited what the person said, capture the emotion. Say, therefore, you really feel your employer may be discriminating against you, he's inconsistent, he doesn't really care about staff and maybe you. Is that how you feel? And then the person will say, yes, psychologically, this guy really understands me. Okay? Wow. Now you are slowly starting to tear that wall down and open him up for suggestion. But keep in mind, he's the one doing all the talking, not you. You're just asking the questions. Then the third step is something we call the accusation audit. An accusation audit is where you highlight something that went wrong between parties in a relationship, or you highlight an aggravated matter, something that was really terrible, something that was wrong. As an example, let's say you dismiss one of your staff, as an example, and now 5 years later you are promoted to be the sales manager of the company, and you are in a boardroom with another company. Your company wants to do business with that company, so you obviously need to negotiate with that company, and here comes their lead negotiator walking in, and it happens to be the guy you fired. That's going to be very awkward. But there's one sure way of how to change that aura, if you want to call it that way, that tension in the air, that elephant in the room, and that is called an accusation audit. You immediately recall the issue between the two of you. Oh, Sam, it's you. Oh, you're probably not happy to see me after what happened between the two of us. Immediately, you bring it to the air and you actually literally take the sting out of the situation. Now he's not going to sit there and think, oh, I hate you because of what you did to me. It's open, it's in the air, and he'll probably give you a grin, don't worry about it, or whatever the case may be. Out of the equation. So that helps. So come back to conciliation. What do I normally do? At that stage, so after I've created the foundation, after I've mirrored, after I've labeled, now I start highlighting the worst case scenario. You do know, Jan, that if we go through arbitration is with prejudice as an example. It means whether you lose or win the case, what's in that award could be used against you in a criminal investigation. Number two, if there are future employers phoning you to do a reference check on you, we can send them the award or tell them the detail as to why you were dismissed. That's with prejudice. And you highlight these issues so that he can understand that it's not necessarily within his interest to pursue arbitration. Then I highlight a positive. There is the outcome, the escape route. Everybody wants an escape. A practical scenario would be, for instance, if you look at all the wars going on, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, often, these wars, they end after a period of time, they end in a stalemate. Neither party knows where to go with this war. Are we escalating it? And then behind closed doors, presidents typically want an escape route. And that's when you see in the political era, America negotiated a ceasefire and hostages are released and whatever, and that's typically people are trying to find escape routes. Now, the same thing applies in conciliation. You've created a foundation, mirrored, you have labeled, and now you've done your accusation audit, you've highlighted the risk for him, for instance, but give him the escape route to say, but listen, we can settle here, maybe on a small amount of money, maybe 2 weeks compensation, a month compensation, as an example. Or, and I had this where people withdraw with only a neutral reference letter. Something simple and easy like that, and that we commit that should there be any companies for future employment sake phone, we will not highlight the fact that you were dismissed or whatever. What companies sometimes do is they will just go into conciliation and say, we'll give you a neutral reference letter, but they didn't set the stage. They didn't start influencing the person. The person's walls are still up, so you don't just throw it in there. You start practicing it. Now, once you've mentioned it, don't start talking. Now you ask the person. So you see how we always ask that person, let them talk, because they're going to feel that they're in control of this process. Now ask them, what do you want? If they say, okay, I want 3 months compensation as example, you don't say yes or no, or you're a joke or whatever. Ask them the question, how is that fair? The question must always be how. Why? Because he must answer, not you. Remember, you're putting the ball in his court. He must do all the talking. He must feel he's in charge. He's in control. Eventually, the solution, he will sign it. Why? Because he felt it was his idea. Not really. You are influencing him. Now you ask him, how is that fair? And when you ask that question, don't answer the question for him. And don't talk immediately. Wait. Keep quiet. Even if you have to wait for 15, 20 seconds, keep quiet. Let him think. Ask him how. You stole $1,000. Now you want another 3 months compensation. How can we do that? Tell me, how is that fair? Now the person actually has to think. Now you are connecting emotions with logic. Because up to now it is just I feel, me, mine, us. No? It's just a feeling. Now you're actually connecting emotions with logic. You ask him, how do you think is that fair? How do you think it's going to look like if we go for arbitration and that arbitration award mentioned that you stole? Now really, for some people it doesn't work. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, yeah, okay? But for some people it does. You're actually increasing your odds here. And then the person must start thinking, and sometimes they just don't have an answer. Why? They haven't thought of it, okay? At that stage, you can then open for suggestion, and you will be surprised how often people, and I've had it, withdraw cases or settle on very low amounts, and outcomes are mostly, I will say, more favorable towards you and the party that you are representing. Just these simple techniques. Okay, let me give you 3 illustrations where this works. While I read this book about 2 years ago, I decided, let's test this technique. So I remember I was laying on my bed and I was reading the book, and my wife came around and she asked me, Toby, won't you throw out the garbage bags? These black bags, the rubbish bags, okay? Now a typical husband will say, I'll do so in 20 minutes. And what will the wife then do? There will be a bomb exploding, boom, because she doesn't want to hear, I'm not going to do it now, I'll do it in 20 minutes later. Why? Because she knows you're going to forget about it. Because that's what we men sometimes do. We say we're going to do it, then we don't do it, okay? It's like, there's a loose screw. Yeah, I'll fix it this weekend, and 2 years later the screw is still loose. You forget about it. So that's where they're coming from. So typically they will start shouting and whatever. So what I did is I started mirroring and labeling. So I said, okay, love, you want me to throw out the garbage bag. She said yes. So psychologically, she feels I'm listening. Secondly, then I label the emotion. Because you feel you're the only one doing work in this house and I'm not putting my part. That's quite right. Which is not true, by the way. I bring my part. But most women, ladies, forgive me, I'm just generalizing. Then I said to her, I am reading this book. Can I do it for you in 20 minutes? Yes, no problem. Thank you so much. You see, it worked. There was no fight. And I did do it. Okay? But I was influencing her. I was calming the medulla oblongata down. I created the illusion that I'm listening to her. I labeled her emotion. And I then suggested, in that circumstances, I made a suggestion and she was open for it. She was no longer in a fighting mode. Second example, with my wife again. We were going to the CCMA in somewhere in the Eastern Cape. And I was driving down there. My wife and my son was on holiday, so they decided to come with me. It was quite a far journey. And at some point, we overslept that evening. And we left very early, like 5 o'clock in the morning. But yes, it was raining, and the wind was blowing. It was like a storm. Anyway, so we drove on this road. There was nobody. At some stage, we got to this they were doing maintenance on the road. So there's this one little windy house with a guard in there that must now show which traffic can drive first. And then you go, and then they put the stop sign on and the go sign on the other side. And eventually those cars will come. But there was nobody. It was storming, a lot of rain and wind, so on and so forth. So now we stood here because the sign said stop. We didn't even know there was somebody in the window house. Everything was just, this was like in the middle of nowhere in South Africa. And we just waited and waited and waited. And my wife told me, listen, drive. Okay, so I just started to drive. And suddenly this guy came running and shouting and screaming out of the window house. And my wife was already lowering the window, you know, because she wanted to fight the person. So I grabbed her by the arm and I said, honey, I've got this. Watch and learn. So I lowered my window. So I did the accusation audit. So I said, sir, I'm so sorry. We are breaking the law because the sign says stop, and illegally I wanted to drive now. You know what the guy said? He said, oh yeah, but don't worry. I'll turn the sign around to make it go and let you go. But when he came out running, he was screaming at us. You can see this guy's going to do something to us. But by doing an accusation audit, taking the sting out of the thing that went wrong, or what I now did wrong, completely changed the attitude of that man and helped us. Okay, conciliation, my third example. A week or two ago, I was in Durban. There's an issue of one manager allegedly assaulting an employee, hitting with a fist on the chest. That's the allegation. So he submitted a grievance against the person, which is fine, but simultaneously the union filed a mutual interest dispute to the bargaining council. But now the commissioners are getting very frustrated actually with this process, because now there's a grievance, now they're filing a mutual interest dispute, sort of suggesting that if you don't adhere to their demands, they're going to go on a strike now, because with a mutual interest dispute, if you don't agree and settle, in 48 hours later they're going to go on a strike, or they can go on a strike. So their demands were, we must immediately suspend that manager. That manager must go in a hearing. He must be dismissed. But there must also be a special investigating committee be established, chaired by a CCMA commissioner, and the company must pay for it. That's their demands. Now, for those of you that know, that is not the legal position. Companies deal with discipline in the workplace according to their policy, and in terms of the Labour Relations Act, in terms of dismissal law. So typically that means if there's a grievance, there will be like a grievance hearing or grievance meeting where the details are investigated, and there will be recommendations thereafter, okay? So now it's with this that I walk into conciliation. So I did my thing. The foundational issues, went around the corner, greeted the union rep. I have seen him before, so I was very happy to see him and ask him how he was doing. I did it in front of the commissioner, so I created a very relaxed and calm environment. It's not capital versus labor, it is not us versus them, there's no power struggle. So we're open for discussions. So I then, with the commissioner, asked, what's the issue in dispute? Can you please talk and tell us? So I created illusion, using control. So he started talking, yeah, they don't trust the employer, the employer is always very mischievous, and so on and so forth, and they demand that a committee be established, paid by the company, chaired by a commissioner. They demand this employee be suspended and dismissed, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, okay. I mirrored, I recited what he said, I captured the emotion of distrust, and then on that emotion, then I said, but listen, sir, don't you think, the question is for him to answer. You are saying that there's no trust. Don't you think it is time for us to mend bridges? And the first step in doing so is to allow this process to run its course in terms of the company's policies and in terms of the laws of the land. Keeping in mind that even you as the union, you're an employer too, that when you have a dispute or have to discipline an employee, you're not going to go to the CCMA to establish a committee. You're going to deal with it in accordance with your policies and the dismissal law in terms of the Labour Relations Act. So what do you say? How do you think we can resolve this matter? He got up, phoned somebody at the union, came back and said, yeah, no, it's fine, we'll just let the company deal with this matter. They completely let go of the demands. Nothing whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I got a message yesterday. We had another case with the union, same union yesterday, the same place, and I got a message from the representative of the company who went there, saying that in the future he only wants to deal with me so we can avoid all arbitrations. Whatever that means. but it was great. So these are some tips and tricks how to influence people and better your odds to get a more favorable outcome. It's not 100% guarantee. You can't manipulate people, but you can influence people. You can influence your boss if you want a salary increase with these techniques. You can influence your spouse. You can influence your landlord. You can influence parties in dispute resolution. So that is for today. If really buy this book from Takealot. I'm not involved in the books. I'm not making money from this book. I'm just saying, what a bloody good book. You're going to lay in the bath every single night and just read and read and read. It is so interesting. And the principles I teach you in this book now, it's amazing. Until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.